السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. وقال تعالى: لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. وقال تعالى: وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين. وقال تعالى: أولم يكفهم أنا أنزلنا عليك الكتاب يتلى عليهم إن في ذلك لرحمة وذكرى لقوم يؤمنون. وعن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: إن لكل أمة شرفا يتباهون بها وإن بهاء أمتي وشرفها القرآن، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. The first ayah that I just recited is from Surah Al-Isra. It is in the 15th juz of the Qur'an. And this ayah is perhaps one of the most powerful ayahs of the Qur'an regarding the Qur'an. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, addressing our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the first person: قُلْ, say, announce unto mankind, لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن. If all of the humans and jinns were to unite in order to produce something like the Qur'an, they would never be able to do so. وَلَوْ كَانَ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ ظَهِيرًا, even if they tried to help and support one another. This Qur'an is a great miracle of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is not just one of the greatest miracles. It is the greatest miracle. This Qur'an is greater than all of the other miracles performed by all of the other prophets that came before our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And according to the hadith in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, there were approximately 124,000 prophets that were sent, and almost all of them were given miracles. But the miracle of the Qur'an is superior to all of those miracles. It is greater and superior to the miracles of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. The miracles that you all have heard from childhood: the splitting of the sea, the turning or bringing forth of his hand from his side, the turning of the staff into a serpent. All of these were miracles given to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. Yet the miracle of the Qur'an is superior to all of those. It is greater than the miracles given to Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, who was able to cure the blind and the leper with the permission of Allah, who was able to give life to the dead with the permission of Allah, who was able to make birds out of clay, blowing to them, and they will become living birds with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The miracle of the Qur'an is superior to the miracles given to Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, who was also given some very interesting and unique miracles. He was given power over the winds and power over the jinns. Yet the Qur'an is superior to all of those miracles. Not only that, our scholars have mentioned the miracle of the Qur'an even eclipses all of the other miracles that the Prophet ﷺ performed himself. And how many miracles did he perform? According to Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, they number not in the dozens, in the hundreds. According to one estimate, it's about 800 miracles he performed. Some even, depending on your gradation of hadith, they go up to 1,000. Now before, I used to think this is just maybe, a saying or maybe an exaggerated claim, until I read a book of hadith by Allama al-Bayhaqi. It's called Dala'il al-Nubuwah. It's about 12 volumes. All of it is about the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one after another, one after the other. And the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they can be divided into about 10 different categories. One of them are the predictions the Prophet made about the future. Anyway, these are the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. Yet the miracle of the Qur'an is superior to all of them. It's even greater than the miracles of Shaqq al-Qamar and Isra wal-Mi'raj. And these two are mentioned in the Qur'an. Shaqq al-Qamar means the splitting of the moon. When the Quraysh demanded a miracle, and the Prophet asked them what they wanted, and they said, we would like you to split the moon in half. And the Prophet ﷺ, with his blessed finger, he pointed towards the moon and he cracked into exactly 2 halves. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ishhadu, bear witness to this. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, who is the eyewitness to this event, he says, I saw with my own eyes 1/2 of the moon was on this side of the mountain, the other one was on the other side. And he said, Ishhadu, bear witness to this. And by the way, these are not just khabri wahid, solitary reports. These are mutawatir hadith, meaning narrated through different narrators, different companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is not something the Prophet ﷺ is telling them about the unseen. Okay, you know, people who are not Muslims, when it comes to Isra wal Mi'raj, it might be difficult. They might say, Na'udhu billah, God forbid, maybe he made this up. But when it comes to an eyewitness account, how can you deny it? It's the Sahabi himself saying, I saw it with my own eyes. And this is in the Qur'an. اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر. The day of judgment has drawn near and the moon has been split. And likewise, we know about Isra wal Mi'raj. That is also a miracle that we believe in. But as I mentioned over and over again and again, the miracle of the Qur'an eclipses all of these other miracles. Now, what is so miraculous about the Qur'an? Up to this point, I just mentioned that the Qur'an is more miraculous than all of these miracles. But what makes it unique? And I'll give you just 2-3 reasons, and I'll get then into the interesting part. Give you very specific examples that you can share, not just with Muslims, especially with non-Muslims, to prove to them the truthfulness of Qur'an and Islam. All of the previous miracles, they were just one-off events. And they were restricted to time and space. Meaning, if you wanted to see the splitting of the sea, you had to have been present in the time of Bani Israel. You had to have been present with Musa alayhi salam. If you wanted Isa alayhi salam to blow into the birds made out of clay and them becoming living birds with the permission of Allah, you had to have been present with the disciples, with the Hawariyun, with Isa alayhi salam. When it comes to Shaqq al-Qamar, you had to have been present in Mecca with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the Qur'an removes the time and space factor out of the equation. You don't have to be in 7th century Arabia to see the i'jaz of the Qur'an. You can be in the 21st century in the most western part of the world and still witness with your own eyes the i'jaz of the Qur'an. This is, as one scholar put it, al-mu'jizatul khalida, the eternal miracle. So this is one point. Second point, all of the other miracles are one-off events. The splitting of the moon, the turning of the staff into a serpent is just one miracle. Where the Qur'an is composed of many, many miracles, right? The eloquence of the Qur'an, right? In fact, every ayah is called an ayah because no one can bring something similar to it. Ayah means a miracle. So in that sense, you have over 6,000 miracles in that category. Then you have predictions that have been made in the Qur'an, very specific predictions. Then the mathematical miracles, the scientific miracles, all of these are different categories. Each one has many, many different examples. So this is the second point. The third point is all of the previous miracles, they were performed by the previous prophets. They were external to the scripture. Meaning, Musa ﷺ performed all of those miracles to prove what? To the people that the Torah is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Isa ﷺ performed all of those miracles to prove that the Injil is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dawood ﷺ performed all of those miracles to prove that the Psalms or the Zabur is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The miracles were external to the scripture, where with the Qur'an, the both of them have been made into one. The scripture is the miracle, and the miracle is the scripture. And before I get to the more interesting part, I want to conclude just the introduction with one beautiful hadith in Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ said, and in the beginning it may seem confusing, and in fact it almost seems like I'm contradicting myself, but I'll explain it after I finish the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, very beautiful hadith, that every prophet has been given a miracle, because of which the people believed in him. But the only miracle I have been given is the Qur'an. And because of this, I hope to have the largest following on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Now the hadith mentions the only miracle I have been given. And the hadith is Bukhari and Muslim, muttafaq alayh. And I just mentioned earlier, 800 miracles. And if we don't want to take that, at least in the Qur'an, there's Shaqq al-Qamar, there's Isra wal-Mi'raj, right? Mutawatir hadith, at least dozens of miracles for sure the Prophet performed. And here the Prophet is saying, the only miracle I have been given. What is the meaning of this? This is a type of eloquence. To say that the only real miracle I have been given is the Qur'an. It is like the sun, when it is out, what use is there of the stars and all of these artificial light? All of these other miracles become trivial, insignificant, and inconsequential compared to the Qur'an. It is the greatest miracle, al-mu'ajizatul khalidah, the eternal miracle, what is composed of so many miracles, and it removes the time and space factor out of the equation. And then I would conclude this part with one ayah as well, which is one of my favorite ayahs from Surah Al-Ankabut. When the Quraysh demanded ayat, miracles, how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala respond to them? At least in this surah, in this section. We know they were given miracles in the past, and even after this, perhaps they were given more miracles as well. But on this occasion, when they asked for miracles, لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ آيَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِ, why hasn't ayat, miracles, been sent down upon him? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to them by saying, أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِهِمْ أَنَّا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ يُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ. Isn't it enough of a miracle that we have revealed unto you the book whose verses are being recited unto them? Isn't this enough of a miracle? What more is it that they want? So this is just a little bit about the introduction of the Qur'an, the ijaz of the Qur'an. Now let's get to the specifics. There's different types of miracles, prediction of the Qur'an, the eloquence of the Qur'an, so on and so forth. By the way, when we think of miracles, some of us who may be familiar with the topic, we just jump to the category of the scientific miracles. And actually that's, for me personally, the least favorite compared to the rest. And also, I like to make this disclaimer, the Qur'an is not a book of science, it's a book of signs. Okay, it's ayat, signs, not science. However, there are things that basically match with modern findings. Now, I have to also caution you, some people do go a little bit too much to the other extreme, in that they try to read in a scientific miracle in every ayah and in every word, and that's also not the purpose of the Qur'an. It's hudan linnas, it's to guide mankind. But there is no doubt there is i'jaz in the Qur'an. So what is the miracle of the Qur'an when it comes to science? The words, the verbs, nouns that are used are so precise that it actually agrees and matches with modern findings. Okay, I'll give you examples so you understand this point better. Let's read Surah Al-Qiyamah in the 29th juz, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the Quraysh. He's addressing those who denied life after death. Like the atheists of today, the Quraysh also used to say, how would we be resurrected again? أَإِذَا مِتْنَا وَكُنَّا تُرَابًا وَعِظَامًا أَإِنَّا لَمَبْعُوثُونَ. After we die and we turn into dust and decayed bones, would we be resurrected again? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to them, لَا أُقْسِمُ بِيَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. I swear by the day of judgment. وَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. And I swear by the self-reproaching nafs, أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَن لَّن نَجْمَعَ عِظَامَهُ. Does man think we would not be able to bring back together his bones? بَلَا قَادِرِينَ عَلَىٰ أَن نُسَوِّيَ بَنَانَهُ. Rather, we are capable of bringing back even the very tips of his fingers. Now, why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the fingertips? Why not mention some other part that might seem more vital to the human body? Maybe the brain, the heart, the liver, the lungs, or something else. What's unique about the fingerprints? Do you know what's unique about it? Recently they have discovered, and by recent, this is a relative term. I mean in the last 1 or 2 centuries, they have discovered that every person has a unique fingerprint. They have never found 2 individuals with identical fingerprints. From the time of Adam alayhi salam up to now. Even identical twins, who they say have a very similar DNA, have different fingerprints. And this is why nowadays it's actually used as a proof in the court of law. When a crime is committed, what is the first thing the investigators, the criminologists look for? Fingerprints. Because that's unique with every person. Previously, people had no idea about the fingerprints. They thought these were just, curves and lines on the tip of your finger. Now let's read the ayah again. أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَن لَّن نَجْمَعَ عِظَامَهُ. Does man think we would not be able to bring back together his bones? بَلَا قَادِرِينَ عَلَىٰ أَن نُسَوِّيَ بَنَانَهُ. We are capable of bringing back even the very tips of his fingers. They say our whole identity, it is codified at the tips of our fingers. And it is similar to the barcode system we have in the back of books. So this is in Surah Al-Qiyamah. Another one, in Surah An-Naba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says regarding the mountains, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلِ الْأَرْضَ مِهَادًا وَالْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا. Have we not made the mountains as awtad, as pegs? Awtad is the plural of the word watad, which means a nail. Awtad, pegs, nail. And what is the function of a nail? We see that a small portion is visible above the surface. More than 95% is actually beneath the surface. And the function is to stabilize whatever it is embedded in. Well, previously, people had no idea about the function of mountains. They just thought that the mountains were raised portions of the earth. Only recently they discovered, geologists, they have discovered that if a mountain is, say, 1 mile above the surface, it is actually 15 times deeper under the surface, under the ground. And it is to stabilize the plates of the earth. There's the different plates. You have the crust and you have the mantle and the core. So it is to hold the plates together. It's like nails that are embedded into the crust of the earth. If these nails, i.e. mountains, were not embedded into the crust, then these plates would always be colliding with each other, and perhaps you would have earthquakes every few minutes. And there was actually a person by the name of Keith Moore, who was a geologist, and by reading this, right, and other things, he came to know that this must be divine. And it is said that he accepted Islam, he took the Shahada, a very famous professor. So this is in Surah An-Naba. Another one is in Surah At-Tariq, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the function of the atmosphere, or the sky, or what is above us. In Surah At-Tariq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتَ الرَّجْمِ. And by the sky that returns. Now before I explain this ayah, I like to mention that sometimes the verses of the Qur'an and the words used could have many layers of meanings. And the person who's very simple can take and benefit from the simple meaning, and for those who are perhaps more advanced or specialized in a certain field, they can also benefit from the more nuanced meaning. So it has different layers of meaning. And this is one example. وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتَ الرَّجْمِ. What is the meaning of this? The simple meaning, which everyone can benefit from, a villager, a Bedouin, any simple person who's not much into science can benefit from, which is still profound, by the way, is that what happens? Water evaporates, it condenses, and then it comes back down to the earth. evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. Water evaporates and it is sent back down to the earth. It evaporates and it is sent back down to the earth. The same amount of water that evaporates eventually then comes down to the earth. Right? That's a very basic, simple meaning that everyone can look at and appreciate and say, subhanAllah, it's amazing. وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الرَّجْعِ. That's one meaning. Now recently, the more advanced meaning of this is that recently they have discovered that there are actually different layers of the atmosphere. And each layer has a function of returning something back down to the earth or back into space. So what I just mentioned earlier is but one layer of the atmosphere. There's another layer of the atmosphere, and the function of that layer is to basically return back the ultraviolet rays emitted by the sun and to protect us. They say one solar flare is more powerful than, 100 billion atomic explosions, right? Only a small amount is allowed to the earth, which is necessary for life on earth, for photosynthesis and things like that. So this is the second layer, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الرَّجْعِ, by the sky that returns. Then you have another layer of the atmosphere. And the function of that layer is to return back the waves that are emitted from radio stations and television satellites. And this is what makes wireless communication possible over long distances. The waves are emitted and then they're sent back down to the earth. وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الرَّجْعِ, and by the sky that returns. You have a few in the 27th juz as well, these scientific miracles. One is in Surah Al-Dhariyat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the heavens. وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ, and the sky we have created with our hand. وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ, and we're still expanding it. Now the latest theory is, and by the way, theories they change in science, and our standard is the Qur'an, not science. But my point is that whatever theory that is actually established would never contradict the Qur'an. As one scholar mentioned, that the actual interpretation of the Qur'an and actual science can never contradict. If there seems to be a clash, it's because the Qur'an can have different layers of meanings and you are giving preference to one over the other, or that theory is not established. In actuality, there can never be a contradiction or a clash between the two. So if there seems to be a different theory in science, as believers, because of other external evidence, we accept the Qur'an to be true. And because of it, what has not been proven, as believers, we also accept that to be true based on the other evidence. You see my point? So we don't base it on science, we base it on Qur'an. The Qur'an says the universe is expanding. But the latest theory in science now is the expansion of the universe. That's the latest theory that they have accepted. And they say that the way they explain this through an analogy is like a balloon. If you inflate it, and suppose you put dots on it with a marker, and it's deflated, and then you blow into it, and you inflate the balloon, all of the dots, they will begin to recede from one another. And that's the analogy they give. All of these solar systems and galaxies, they are moving, they are receding from one another. The universe is expanding. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ, and we're still expanding it. In Surah Ar-Rahman, a verse that some of you may know, مَرَجَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ يَلْتَقِيَانِ بَيْنَهُمَا بَرْزَخٌ لَا يَبْغِيَانِ. He has caused the two seas to meet one another, merge. And perhaps the word maraja and merge might have the same root word, because it's interesting. And I know I'm going to another tangent, but there are words in Arabic and in English, they have the same origin, right? There was an ancient language that was spoken. Some of the words made its way into the Eastern languages and eventually into Arabic. And that same word made its way into the Romance languages, into Latin, eventually into English. And so they just are pronounced differently, but they have the same meaning. For example, the word asatir in the Qur'an and stories, history, is the same origin, the same word. Qistas and justice mean the same thing. Firdaus and paradise, the same thing. Sirat and street. Okay, in Latin, sirat, right? So eventually, and Allama Suyuti rahimahullah in Al-Itqan, he has given many examples of this. So perhaps even the word maraja, earth, right? It's a lot of words are like that. Kahf and cave. So maraj al-bahrain, he has merged the two oceans, the two seas. But baynahuma barzakhun la yabghin. Between them is a barrier that they cannot transgress. And recently they have discovered, oceanographers, that you'll find two bodies of water, right? Fresh water, salt water, they will come together. Meet at some point, but they will still retain its own characteristics, right? Because of its own density and salinity, and all of that will be different. Even the water is in liquid form, and it should just completely merge into it and become the same. But no, they retain their characteristics, as if there is a barrier, a partition between them. بَيْنَهُمَا بَرَزَخٌ لَا يَبْغِيَانِ. And it is said one person, who is an oceanographer, when he read this, he said about the Prophet, he must be a sailor or someone who knew about sailing. And when he came to know, the Prophet was in Mecca. He had never stepped foot in the ocean. He had never sailed the ocean. And he said he took the Shahada and he accepted Islam. Because of course, to the one that who's in a certain field, it affects them a little bit more. It hits them more, because how could someone have actually come up with something like this? Because in other verses too, the way the ocean is described is in a way that you have to have been a diver to go inside of the ocean. Otherwise, you cannot even come up with that analogy. Like the one who's in darkness, right? Allah says in the Quran, أو كظلمات في بحر رجي يغشاه موج من فوقه موج من فوقه سحاب ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها. That the person who's in darkness, his example is like the one who's in the ocean. There are waves upon waves, right? Clouds, and he's in so much darkness that if he was to stretch forth his hand, he cannot see it, right? So that's the analogy being given. Now to come up with this analogy, now they've discovered when you go about 1,000 feet below sea level into the ocean, even though the water may be clear from above, but the deeper you go, the darker it gets. And you reach a point where you cannot even see your own hand. So how, unless recently with submarines and things like that, now we know it gets darker and darker the deeper you go. Okay, let me give you another example of this category. Just simple analogies that have been made, right? But even within that, there's an interesting scientific finding. In Surah Al-An'am, in the 8th juz of the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ وَمَنْ يُرِدْ أَنْ يُضِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا كَأَنَّمَا يَصَعَّدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ. The one whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to guide, He opens up his heart for the religion of Islam. Okay? Not physically. This is not shaqq sadr, sharh sadr, which is different. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassirli. In a spiritual sense. Alam nashrah laka sadra. This is about sharh sadr, not shaqq sadr, which is different for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the one whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to guide, He opens up his heart for the religion of Islam. وَمَنْ يُرِدْ أَنْ يُضِلَّهُ. And the one whom He wishes to misguide, يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. He makes his heart, his chest, tight and constricted, كَأَنَّمَا يَصَعَّدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ. Like the one who's going up into space. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making a comparison. And we see this comparison, and this is balagha, this is eloquence, that you compare something that is abstract, right, to something that is physical. Like if in Arabic you want to say someone is brave, you would say he is like a lion. A lion is something that is physical, you can see. Okay, Zaydun kal asad. So the one who is misguided, his heart becomes tight and constricted. The one who is misguided, his chest becomes tight and constricted. So something that is spiritual, you cannot see that, is being compared to something that is physical. And what is that? كَأَنَّمَا يَصَعَّدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ. Like the one who's going up into space. Now recently they have discovered the higher you go up in space, because of lack of oxygen, the tighter becomes your chest. And that's why when you have to climb tall mountains like Mount Everest, you have to take an oxygen bottle. When you are flying aeroplanes at very high altitudes, they need to have oxygen masks. Because the higher you go, the lesser the oxygen, and therefore the tighter your chest becomes. Now, how could the Prophet have known even giving this comparison or analogy? Because of course there were no tall mountains like Mount Everest in Mecca. And of course planes and things like that, that's a recent phenomenon. So the one whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to misguide, he makes his heart tight and constricted like the one who's going up into the sky. And I'll just mention one more, then I'll move on to another category. One is in Surah Al-Nahl, right? Surah Al-Nahl means the honeybee, right? And in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the honeybee and in a way that he's addressing the honeybee. So let me first translate the ayah and explain some very basic grammar. Okay, I try not to make it too complicated, but you have to understand this point to really appreciate this. When you hear this, inshallah, you should say, subhanallah, how great of a miracle this is. وَأَوْحَى رَبُّكَ إِلَى النَّحْلِ And your Lord has inspired the honeybee, has commanded the honeybee, thus, أَنِ اتَّخِذِي مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا Commanding it thus, in these words, construct your homes, your dwellings in the mountains, وَمِنَ الشَّجَرِ وَمِمَّا يَعْرِشُونَ And in the trees, and also the places the people erect, in the buildings. ثُمَّ كُلِي مِنْ كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ Then eat of every different type of fruit. فَاسْلُكِي سُبُلَ رَبِّكِ ذُلُلًا Then follow the paths of your Lord that has been made easy for you. يَخْرُجُ مِنْ بُطُونِهَا شَرَابٌ مُخْتَلِفٌ There comes forth from their bellies a drink of varying colors. فِيهِ شِفَاءٌ لِلنَّاسِ In it there is a cure for mankind. Now here I'm not going to focus on honey and the cure it has and all of that. That's well known. I want to actually draw your attention to something else, of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the honeybee. You know, in Arabic, when you have to address a male, you use a certain pronoun. When you address a female, you use a different pronoun. So if I say you in Arabic, if it's a man, it's anta. If it's a female, it's anti. The verb also changes. If I say to a man, eat, it will be kul. If it's to a female, kuli. Okay? So you just add e at it. In English, we don't have this. You. It doesn't become you, right? You. It's the same. But in Arabic, you have more pronouns. It's a little bit more specific. Now, generally speaking, the Qur'an uses the masculine form. And it is inclusive of everyone. Because every time the Qur'an is not going to say all of the men and all of the women all the time. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. And this is inclusive of men and women. So generally the masculine form is you. All of a sudden here, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the honeybee in the singular form and is commanding it, he is specifically using the feminine form. ثُمَّ كُلِي مِنْ كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ فَاسْلُكِي سُبُلَ رَبِّكِ It's very clear, he's only speaking and addressing the female honeybee, not the male honeybee. You know why? Recently they have discovered that it's actually the female honeybee that does all of the work in the beehive. They say that the male honeybees, they're very lazy. They don't do anything, right? All they do is just sit with the queen, and their job is to inseminate the queen, and that's it. As for the female honeybees, they do all of the work. They go out, look for flowers, they collect the nectar, they come back, then they feed the male honeybees, then they protect it against external enemies, and so on and so forth. People did not know of this before, right? Even Shakespeare, when he writes, he says when the male worker bee goes out and comes back and reports to the king, where it's actually the opposite. The female honeybee goes and comes back and reports to the queen. ثُمَّ كُلِي مِنْ كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ فَاسْلُكِي سُبُلَ رَبِّكِ ذُلُلًا So this is one category of miracles. Another category of miracles are the predictions made in the Qur'an. And by predictions, I mean specific incidents. Okay? Now there's something very generic. Right? We have generic things mentioned in the hadith, that there will be a lot of fitnas, a lot of turmoil, a lot of haraj and killing and all of that, which is more generic. But here, I want to give you examples of specific incidents. One of them is in Surah Al-Rum, okay, the beginning of Surah Al-Rum, which is in the 21st juz. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومِ Alif Lam Mim, the Romans have been defeated. فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ In a nearby land. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. After their defeat, they will become victorious once again. Now for me to really explain how this is a miracle, let me give you a little bit of the sabab al-nuzul, the cause of revelation of the surah. This is a Makki surah, revealed in Makkah. And at that time, and before that, the Romans and the Persians were always fighting against each other. So to the north of Makkah, Arabia, there were these two superpowers, the Persian Empire, to be more specific, the Sassanid Empire, and the Roman, to be more specific, the Byzantine, Eastern Byzantine Empire. They were always fighting against each other. For like 300 years, they're always at each other's throat, fighting against each other. It just so happened that during the Meccan period, right, the Quraysh, the Persians defeated the Romans. At that time, the Quraysh, they wanted to draw a good omen for themselves from this. So they would say to the Muslims, you know, just how the Persians were similar to us, because they are fire worshippers, and the Quraysh are saying, we're idol worshippers. So these people who are similar to us, you know, just how they defeated the Romans, who are people similar to you, well, we're also, once and for all, going to get rid of you. Because the Romans are similar in that they're Christians, they follow a scripture, they have a line of prophets and Qur'an, and the message of the Prophet is a continuation of that message. So, at that time, the surah was revealed. Alif Lam Mim, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ. Yes, the Romans have been defeated. فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ, in a nearby land. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. After their defeat, they will become victorious once again. In how many? فِي بِضْعِ سِنِينَ, in a number of years. Now the word bid'ah in Arabic could mean anywhere from 3 to 9. So it is said, and this is mentioned in the seerah, right? These stories are mentioned. Although again, these are not like grade 8 type of hadith, but again, just another tangent of mine. Not everything is grade A level. That's for aqidah, for fiqh, and things like that. Most of the seerah is actually history. And we know history is not held to the same standard, because it's just stories. As long as it doesn't conflict and contradict generic principles of the Qur'an, we accept stories of the seerah. Most of the seerah is like that. It's not like grade A, like grade B, grade C. And Ibn Ishaq was the famous seerah expert. Sometimes the chains are broken and things like that. But I just want to mention, because I know it's being recorded, so sometimes people can say, what is this story? It's not very strong, very authentic. Most of the seerah is not to that level. The standard used is basically a little bit less by the scholars. So anyway, one of the chieftains of Mecca, he came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he said, do you actually believe in what was just revealed upon your companion? And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, yes, if it was revealed upon him, I believe in it. So he said, okay, if it happens as your companion says, I'll give you 5 camels. If not, then you would have to give me 5 camels. Are you ready for this? And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he said, yes, I'm ready. Now, by the way, this is before the laws of gambling and all of that were revealed. Okay? And in a sense, Abu Bakr is not gambling, because on one side, it's confirmed. We know what the results are. Anyway, he goes to the Prophet ﷺ. He mentions the whole incident. And the Prophet just corrects him in one place though. He says, you mentioned 3 years, but the word used is anywhere from 3 to 9. And that's why, remember the point I mentioned earlier, that if there seems to be a clash between signs or something and the Qur'an, it is because maybe of understanding of the Qur'an or understanding of signs. The actual message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and actual signs, physical signs, can never contradict. Because both are from Allah. This is in the spiritual world and this is in the physical world. But this is both from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet said to him, go increase the number of years from 3, make it from 3 to 9. And also increase the number of camels. From 5, make it 100. And so he goes back to the person and he says, mentioned the whole thing, it was my misunderstanding. Is it okay if we extend the number of years? We can extend the number of camels as well. And the person said, sure, not a problem. It's not possible for the Romans to stand back on their feet in the next 1 or 2 decades, right? Because we're not talking about a small village or a city or a country. We're talking about an entire superpower. And so they agreed, and after a few years, approximately 7 years after this, when the Muslims had migrated to Medina, in the second year of the Hijrah, when Badr took place, and 330 Muslims defeated about 1,000 of the Quraysh, that's when they received the news that the Romans have just defeated the Persians. وَيَوْمَئِذٍ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. And on that day, the believers, they would rejoice. And so they had two reasons to be happy. One because of Badr, and one because of this prediction that came true. So this one miracle. Another one is in Surah Al-Qasas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, it happened during the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was leaving, and we all know the whole story, I will not repeat the whole story. The Prophet had to go, he hid in the cave of Thawr, and then when he was going towards Medina, he happened to step onto a road that actually led to Mecca. And when the Prophet stepped on it and he looked towards Mecca, naturally he became very emotional. And he addressed the city, metaphorically, that you're the best of cities and you're the most beloved cities to me. Had my people not forced me to leave, I would have never left thee. And at that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this verse. إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ. The one who has revealed the Qur'an upon you, surely he would return you to your place of abode. And what happened? Remember, this is at a time when both of them are fearing for their lives, right? They're both hiding. And Allah is saying, of a surety you will be returned to your ma'ad, your place of return. And we know, a few years after that, during Fath Makkah, the conquest of Makkah, the Prophet comes back, not just as a regular person, but with 10,000 Sahaba. And we know they conquered Makkah with hardly any bloodshed, and that's the highlight of the seerah, right? إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ. The other one is in Surah Fath, about the Prophet going for Umrah, and he was prevented that year, and he had seen a dream. It's a long story of Hudaybiyah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. لَقَدْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ رَسُولَهُ الرُّؤْيَا بِالْحَقِّ لَتَدْخُلُنَّ الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ. Of a surety, you will enter Masjid al-Haram. And this was also fulfilled as well. So this is another set of miracles. Before I continue, what time is the Isha Salah? 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock? Okay. Oh, 9 o'clock, we have time. So this is another set of miracles. Then another one is the sheer eloquence of the Qur'an. And this is something, especially the classical Arabs, they appreciated this more than anything else. Even the Quraysh, even the non-Muslims, even they were mesmerized by the Qur'an. There's a story about Walid ibn Utbah. He was the father of Khalid bin Walid. Khalid bin Walid, a famous Sahabi who became a Muslim, Saifullah. His father, Walid ibn Utbah, he once came to the Prophet to speak to him. And he told the Quraysh that, let me speak to him, right? And he was a little bit more, you can say, diplomatic. He's not like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, because the enemies of the Prophet were also different types. You have those that always stoop to dirty tactics, like Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, and others. And you have those who are enemies, but noble enemies. These were arrogant, and they were ignorant of the truth. And many of those who were ignorant of the truth, but they have some goodness in their heart, eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them, almost all of them, to Islam. Like Abu Sufyan, Amr ibn al-As, Khalid ibn Walid, for a good portion of the time. Uhud, why the Muslims lost? Khalid ibn Walid was on the other side. But these were the noble enemies. And then you have like a spectrum, right? So Walid ibn Utbah kind of falls into that, right? He was not like Abu Jahl, because of his arrogance and things like that, unfortunately never accepted Islam. But definitely better than Abu Jahl. So he says, why not I go and speak to him, right? And then he comes and he speaks to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, "O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have caused division in the community. You have done this. You have done that. Please let us know, what is it that you want? If it is some type of position you want, we are ready to accept you as our king, as our leader. If it's money that you want, we're all ready to put together our wealth, and you become the richest man in Makkah. If it is a woman you desire to marry, it's your choice. You can marry whoever you wish. And on. He mentioned all of these things. And the Prophet, he listened to him. And after he had finished, he said, "Oh Walid, are you done?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Now may I speak?" He said, "Yes." And so the Prophet started reciting Hamim Sajda, which was just regular. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hamim, Tanzilun min ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kitabun fussilat ayatuhu Qur'anan Arabiyyan liqawmi ya'lamun. Bashiran wa nadhira, fa'a'rada aktharuhum fahum la yasma'un. And he was just listening and he was just mesmerized until when he came to the ayah, فَإِنْ أَعْرَضُوا فَقُلْ أَنذَرْتُكُمْ صَاعِقَةً مِثْلَ صَاعِقَةِ عَادٍ وَثَمُودٍ. And if they reject, then I warn you of a thunderbolt, like the way it hit Aad and Thamud. And by the time he reached this part, it affected Walid so much, he came to the Prophet and said, "Please just stop, do not read anymore," afraid that literally a bolt of lightning would just come and smack him out of existence. And when he came back, his face would just pale. And the Quraysh, they said, "This is not the same person who had left us. The one who's coming back is not the same one who had left us." And what did Walid say? He says, "You know I'm the best poet amongst you." Right? Walid was known to be the most eloquent person. No one can compete. He said, "By Allah, what I have just heard is not even the kalam of the jinn." Right? Forget about the humans, it's not even the kalam of the jinn. This is just their way of saying that it's beyond imagination. And he says, وَإِنَّ عَلَيْهِ الْحَلَاوَةِ. Even the way he described it is so eloquent. It is so beautiful and so elegant. وَإِنَّهُ لَيَعْلُو وَلَا يُعْلَى. And surely it should conquer everything, and it will never be conquered. And then he even said, "Let it be. If he happens to conquer and becomes a leader, in his success is your success. He is one of you. And if something happens to him, well, someone else, from his point of view, did the dirty job. We are not going to be blamed. We killed our own person from our own tribe. So let it be. Very logical. If in his success is your success. And if someone else, if he is not successful, if someone else gets rid of him, they have done the job for you." And what did the people say to Walid? "Oh Walid, it seemed he has bewitched you as well. It seemed like he has cast a spell on you as well." And that's why later on when Abu Jahl came to know, because Abu Jahl and Walid, they were from the tribe Banu Makhzum. And Walid was older, so Abu Jahl comes to him and he said, "The people know that you have been mesmerized by the Qur'an and this is not going to be accepted." And again, Walid said the same thing. "You know I am the best poet, and what I heard is not poetry." He said, "The people are still not going to like, meaning you have to do something. They're not going to accept this one. So you have to say something." And so he thought, and he pondered. And this is in Surah Al-Dathir. إِنَّهُ فَكَّرَ وَقَدَّرَ فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ ثُمَّ قُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ ثُمَّ نَظَرَ ثُمَّ عَبَسَ وَبَسَرَ ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ وَاسْتَكْبَرَ فَقَالَ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرُ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا قَوْلُ الْبَشَرِ سَأُصْلِيهِ سَقَرَ. So he thought, what should I say? If we say he is a soothsayer, he said, no, this has nothing to do with what the magicians, what they say. If we say he's a madman, that doesn't make any sense. We know he was so truthful and honest, and in everything else, we accept what he says, and it makes perfect sense. In this one aspect that we don't know, we're saying he's a madman, but in everything else, he's completely normal. If we say he's a magician, well, that doesn't make sense anyway, because his lifestyle is completely different than what the magicians do. Even they knew how the magician, they lived their lives. Then he thought and he pondered. And finally he said, we would say this is magic. Not because, na'udhu billah, the Prophet is a magician, but because it has the effect, from his point of view, of magic, that it has that effect on the hearts of people. And so he said we would just say that he is a magician, that this is just magic of old. So this is about the eloquence of the Qur'an, the effect it has on the listener, right? And this is now, what I mentioned earlier is something that I personally kind of knew, but other scholars have mentioned, now I have not tried this myself as much, but they say even now as well, it actually has effect on the listeners as well, even if they don't understand. And yes, I know that to a certain level. I don't know if it happens to everyone, but there's stories from Shuyukh I've heard from many people that at times they'll even have non-Muslims listen to it, right? And especially those like musicians and those who are into melody, right? One Shaykh, he was mentioning that he was at a, when he was young at a college, and his professor was a musician, and he was actually listening to the Qur'an, and he said, "What is it that you're listening to?" And so he gave him, to listen, and he said, immediately I could just see him just lower his gaze, and I could actually see tears rolling down his eye. And when he finished, he said, "What was that? I've never heard anything like this," right? Even though he was a musician and he knew everything about melody and everything, right? And this is also what the Quran says about some of the non-Muslims who had some goodness in them, and eventually they accepted Islam. وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ. When they hear what has been revealed unto you, their eyes well up with tears because of the truth that they have recognized. Even though specifically is about Najashi and others, but again, anyone who falls into that category. And we know Najashi eventually did accept Islam. So that verse is about him. وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ. Those Christians, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises them because the sincerity they have. وَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ ذَلَكَ بِأَنَّ مِنْهُمْ قِسِّيسِينَ وَرُهْبَانًا وَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. And then the verse continues, the next verse, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ. When they hear. Because not all of them are the same. And a lot of times we generalize, right, people and groups and things like that, and we have to be careful. Every individual is different. Of course, there's haqq and batil that's there, but even the kuffar have been divided into two categories. Even the munafiqun seems to have two categories. And even the Muslims, in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, you have the people of the right hand, and you have as-sabiqun, as-sabiqun. You have those who reject the truth, and you have those who are kind of ignorant of the truth. Even in Surah Al-Fatiha we read, غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ. Those who reject the truth, they receive the wrath and the anger of Allah. And وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ are those who are misguided. We don't want to be in any one of those categories. We want to know the truth, and after knowing the truth, we want to implement it. But, of course, those who are مَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ are more dangerous, and the issue is more serious than وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ, even though both are, of course, upon batil. Okay? So this is about the eloquence of the Qur'an. Oh, by the way, when it comes to the predictions, my favorite prediction, and this is something that all of us know, but because it is so common, we take it so lightly. And it's just amazing, it's almost mind-blowing when you think about it. And this is a point you can always share with non-Muslims, especially when you have discussions, like friendly debates. Not the nasty type of debates, but friendly discussion with them. You can mention these points about the Quran, the preservation of the Quran. And that's the prediction that is in the Quran. Very powerful. No one can deny this. In Surah Al-Hijr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Verily, we have revealed the dhikr, which is one of the names of the Quran, and we are the ones who are going to preserve it. The preservation of the Quran. Isn't it amazing that the Quran is not only the most written and recited book, it is the most memorized book. When it comes to the previous scriptures, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we had placed the responsibility of preserving those scriptures upon the religious leaders. إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا التَّوْرَاةَ فِيهَا هُدًى وَنُورٌ يَحْكُمُ بِهَا النَّبِيُّونَ الَّذِينَ أَسْلَمُوا لِلَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالرَّبَّانِيُّونَ وَالْأَحْبَارُ. Rabbaniyun, the rabbis, ahbar, the monks, بِمَا اسْتُحْفِظُوا مِنْ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. But they were not able to preserve it. When it comes to the Quran, since it is the final scripture, the final testament, no other prophet to come after the Prophet ﷺ, therefore it will be intact. It will never be distorted. No one can change. People can misinterpret meaning, the ta'wil of it, but you can always come back to the actual word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will always be intact. So the miracle is in the preservation of the Quran, the alfaz. And Allah has mentioned this, and this is something that we can all attest to. No matter where you are in China or in Timbuktu, doesn't matter in which part of the world. You go from the east to the west, you are reading the same Quran. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Do you know, there has never been a week, a month, a year that passed by and this world was without a hafiz. It's not just hundreds or thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people who have memorized the Quran. Literally millions of people have memorized the Quran. and they have actually, memorized it, and especially in the Muslim world, right? And not forget about the Muslim world, even here, where Muslims are not the majority, but still you go to any masjid, most of the masajid you see in Ramadan, there's someone who's leading the salah, right? In most of the cases, they will be leading the salah, and a lot of times they will be reading from memory. And there will be one or two people behind to correct him in case he makes a mistake. Where does that even exist? You have children as young as 7, 8, 9 years of age who have memorized the entire Qur'an. And a lot of times they don't even speak the language, right? They learn the language later on, the entire Qur'an. And some of them have memorized in such an amazing way. It's just mind-blowing. Many of the brothers, and by the way, many of those who memorize the Qur'an, their native tongue may not be Arabic, right? Whether you go to the east or to the west in Mauritania, they memorize even the different qira'at as well. One person who had actually won a contest in Dubai or somewhere, they have a annual hifz competition, right? And it's very beautiful, by the way. It's amazing, where every country is being represented. And so perhaps he had won the contest or whatever. When he had went there, it was time for salah. So they're looking who should lead the prayer. So he felt, okay, there's no one, and maybe perhaps because I'm a hafiz and memorized the Quran, won the contest. So he said, okay, perhaps I should lead the salah. So for the elderly person, he said, how many qira'ats do you know? He said, in one qira'at. He said, come back. Our girls over here learned the Quran at least in 2 qira'ats. You're not even qualified for this. Right? My point is, this is a little bit more advanced. The Quran is unzil ala sabati ahruf, has been revealed upon 7 modes of recitation, which is very, very advanced, right? Only some people specialize in this, right? And this is how the Quran was revealed. And I know this is opening up another kind of worms. What does this mean? The Quran has been changed or not? No. It's not like the Bible where one group says 66 books, the other one says 73. Only one of the two can be correct. Where the Quran, unzil ala sabati ahruf, it was revealed upon these 7 modes of recitation. Malik Yawmiddin is what you're familiar with. If you go to West Africa or North Africa, they will be reciting Malik Yawmiddin, which is as correct and as authentic as Malik Yawmiddin. And both give an added meaning. Malik means owner. Malik means king. When you're a king, you have power, but you may not necessarily own something, right? I'm talking about from a human perspective. When you're Malik, you're just the owner. You're the ruler of 50 states, but you may not even own one state. When you're the owner, Malik, you own something. I may own this, I may own my shoes, my clothes, my car, but I'm not the king of the country or the world. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Malik and Malik in the ultimate sense. So Malik Yawmiddin, Malik Yawmiddin. So there's different qira'at. Some of you who might listen to Qari Abdul Basit, sometimes you read Surah Al-Duha, Surah Al-Shams in different qira'at. So anyway, there are people who memorize it in different qira'at. I remember my teacher, who was just a hifz teacher, but, and I don't know if he had known the whole Quran like that, but sometimes he would, when we had free time, he would ask us, okay, say a verse, right? We would say a verse, and he was able to say the verse before that, and then the ayah before that, and then the ayah before that. If I were to ask someone, what is the last ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha, most of you might not know, even though we read Fatiha 30, 40, 50 times a day, but we know it in one order. There are some people who literally have memorized it in such a way that if you were to ask them where it is, they'll tell you the page number, the ayah number, and all of that. I'm not by the way one of those, but there are people like that. And I've actually seen clips of students, young students, and they would actually tell the person, the questioner, say 3 or 4, like think of the ayah in your mind. Think of the ayah in your mind. Just think about how amazing this is. And you think of the ayah, and they would say, how does the page begin? With what letter? Right? So you think of an ayah, suppose it is Ar-Rahman or whatever. That page, what letter does it begin with? What letter does it end with? Is it a Makki surah or a Madani surah? And then how many verses are in that chapter? 3 or 4 generic questions. By the time you finish answering these questions, they say, this is the ayah you're thinking of in your mind. This is how they have memorized the Quran. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Verily, we have revealed the book, and we're the ones who are going to preserve it. Okay? And mashallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses different people for different things. And by the way, again, another side tangent, but we should also always appreciate this miracle. No one is perfect, and you might have someone who might have maybe some issues in one thing, but they're so good in something else, right? They might not be perfect in every single thing. Sometimes very unique, minor, even like aqidah issues or this. We're not talking about the major issues. Of course, they're, the articles of faith and things like that. But sometimes you may have someone who's maybe not necessarily 100% accurate or precise in certain things, but overall, they have so much good in them. Right? And Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah actually mentioned, even though he's the most strictest and the harshest, all of our scholars, when it comes to bid'at and other groups, but you know what he himself said? It is possible for a person who is from another sect, right? From Ahl Sunnah, not Ahl Sunnah, from the Muslim community. Because of course there are those sects that are out of the Muslim community. So within the Muslim community is divided into many, many sects. That eventually, inshallah, they will go to Jannah, but only one is upon the truth. I said there may be someone who may have an issue in one thing, and there's another person who's 100% accurate. Yet that person might have a higher level in Jannah and paradise than this person because of so much other good that he may have done. Meaning it's not the label that is going to save you. If you just have the label Sunni, and of course we are Sunnis and we defend that 100%, but you don't pray your salah, you're not good to your parents, you're not giving charity, you barely fasting, but I'm Sunni. Another person has a different label, but overall he worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he prays his salah, he might pray, place of the hands here and there, but overall he would have a higher level. So the point is, we should never generalize, and when it comes to the Qur'an and things like that, we should always appreciate this miracle, doesn't matter where it is. And most of the people who actually memorize the Qur'an, they might be from other places and things like that, but we still need to show that respect to them because Allah has used them to keep the Qur'an in their hearts. Before, again, there's more that can be said. I can stop here. Well, I don't know if there's a minute or two. I can mention one more. What time is the adhan? Is 8:45? Okay, should I just say one more miracle and then we'll conclude with that? Is that okay? Okay, one more. And this is actually my favorite one. And this is one that you might not see in these books that talk about miracles of the Qur'an. This is in Surah Al-Kawthar, where Allah subhanahu... 2 minutes? Oh, 10 minutes? Okay, all right. In Surah Al-Kawthar, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. Now, to understand this miracle, we have to know the sabab al-nuzul. What is the sabab al-nuzul? There was a person who, when the male children of the Prophet started to pass away one after the other, Abdullah, Ibrahim, right? When they started passing away one after the other, this man, who was a leader of one of the tribe, he said about the Prophet ﷺ that huwa al-abtar, which means he's cut off from progeny. And he was trying to stress the fact that we don't need to worry about him anymore because all of his male children are dying. And of course, in that culture, it's the children, the male children, who carry on the legacy of the father. So he has no more male children. Therefore, we don't need to worry about him. Once he passed away, his ideology, his message would also finish with him. Allah revealed in the Qur'an, إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ وَلَبْتَرِ. As for you, إِنَّ أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرِ. We have given you abundance of good. And as for your enemy, إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ وَلَبْتَرِ. As for you, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. We will elevate your status. We will elevate your remembrance. Right? Now this is the miracle. The Prophet ﷺ, how his status has been elevated. Now before I explain this, let me ask you a theoretical question. Imagine if you wanted to make someone famous. We want to make him the most famous person in the world, right? The most famous person throughout history. We have so much technology. There's so much we could do, right? Perhaps we talk about him on the television, on every single channel we talk about him, on every single radio station we talk about him, in the newspaper, on the internet, and in every country, in every city, in every village. But how long would this last for? A day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years maybe, a decade? First, this has never happened, right? Even on television, it's just one channel for one thing, another channel for something. You will never have all of the channels just only talking about one political leader. And every country talk about their political leaders in their television stations. So it has never happened that one person is being talked about all of the time, right? Look at the Prophet ﷺ. He is being mentioned just by name alone at least some 400 million times a day, just by name alone. Now, where do I come up with this math? There are over 1 billion Muslims. So suppose even 1% of them pray Salah. We hope inshallah it's more than that. But even if 1% of them pray Salah, 1% of 1 billion is 10 million. And when you're in Salah, just in the sitting position, you say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Just 5 times right there. That's 40 times just in the Farad Salah, the Sunan Salah. Times, 10 million. That's 400 million right there. Then the Adhan, as Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu mentioned, never would the name of Allah be mentioned except that the Shahada, Muhammadur Rasulullah, will be mentioned after it. I bear witness and I testify, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. And you know what is amazing? Almost every second of the day, someone in the world is saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. Because the world is round, it is rotating. So there's sunset every time, right? It's rotating, sunset, sunset, sunset. So everywhere, adhan is being given. As there's sunset, there's also sunrise simultaneously in some other part of the world. And not just sunrise, Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib. So Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, all of them are happening simultaneously every second of the day. So there's hundreds of people, at least dozens of people who are simultaneously saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. Wa rafa'na laka dhikra. The name Muhammad, statistically speaking, they say is a name that is used more than any other name. And then if you add the derivatives of Muhammad, Ahmad and Hamad and Mahmud, it's even more, right? And many of you might know, whether you are from the Indian subcontinent, you are from, say, North Africa, or from the Middle East, we see that in your family, there will be someone who has the name Muhammad, either the first name, middle name, or as the last name. If it's not a distant relative, if it's not a close relative, definitely it will be some distant relative. I can almost guarantee you, most of you would have someone in your family, in your distant family, that has the name Muhammad, right? And the name Muhammad is so common, it reminds me of a story. There was once a sheikh, his name was Muhammad al-Ashir, Muhammad the 10th. So once his musalli, he asked him, Sheikh, why is your name Muhammad al-Ashir, Muhammad the 10th? He said, because my father, he had 10 sons, mashallah. And he loved the name Muhammad so much, he named all of us Muhammad. And the first one became Muhammad al-Awwal, the second Muhammad al-Thani. I happen to be the last one, so my name is Muhammad al-Ashir, Muhammad the 10th, right? The name Muhammad has been used by many, famous people, all right? Famous athletes, even in this part of the world. Many of you might have heard of the name Muhammad Ali, the younger generation, and even the older generation, you may have known him, right? Of course, I'm not to speak about his boxing career, what ruling that is, but he has so much goodness, and there's nothing wrong in speaking about the goodness. In fact, when he would speak, it would almost seem like a sheikh is speaking about spirituality and the hereafter and things like that. And the effect that he had, perhaps maybe other people outwardly are very religious might not have. His name, he changed it to Muhammad Ali. And when he reached the pinnacle of his career, they said, you have reached a point where now we can actually dedicate a star to your name in Hollywood. Okay, on Hollywood floor, we can have a star dedicated to your name. And he refused. He said, my name resembles the name of my Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I don't want this name to be on the floor where it will be trampled upon by the people. And they insisted and they asked, and he said no. And finally, they said, okay, we'll put it on the wall. And he agreed to that. And so that is the only name. And I've actually seen a picture of that. That's why I'm mentioning it. All of the other names of the celebrities is on the floor, and Muhammad is the only name that is actually on the wall. So even in the physical sense, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرًا, and when you've elevated your status and your remembrance, right? إِنَّ شَانِيَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ. The person who said this, he was very wealthy, he was very rich. Outwardly, it seemed that everyone should remember him. No one would know it. If I were to ask you his name, only a historian and expert in the seerah might know the person's name. Most of the people would not know. And everyone knows the name Muhammad, even if they're not a Muslim. And from a worldly point of view, the Prophet ﷺ, he did not have male children, but his progeny continued through Fatima, radiallahu anha. And in a spiritual sense, we're all the children of the Prophet ﷺ. In that, he said, أَنَا لَكُمْ كَالْوَالِدْ أُعَلِّمُكُمْ. I'm to you like a father, I teach you everything. And his wives are our mothers, Ummahat al-Mu'mineen. Right? So in a spiritual sense, there are over 1 billion people who are the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. And even biologically, it still continues, right? Although again, there are always exaggerations that claims that people make, and especially in the part that I'm from, it seems like every second and third person is related to the Prophet ﷺ. I don't know how that happens, how did everyone just migrate over there. But anyway, that is there. There's some people who do have a genealogy. It goes actually back to the Prophet ﷺ. But in the spiritual world, we know that, of course, the message of the Prophet has still continued, and inshallah will continue to Yawm al-Qiyamah. So this is the most powerful miracle. When it comes to other things, you can talk about it, but it's all based on faith. I cannot convince a non-Muslim about Shaqq al-Qamar, Isra wal-Mi'raj. It's all in our books. How are you going to explain that to them? When it comes to the Qur'an, it's a physical, tangible miracle. You can see, look at the Qur'an. It's the same Qur'an. It has been over 1400 years. It is preserved. There has to be some divine power behind it. No other scripture, secular or religious, comes even close, remotely close to the Qur'an in terms of preservation. Right? The holiest scriptures, I mean, of course, the word, the Tawrat and Zabur and Injil, they're not in their original forms anymore. And they're so different, so many different versions and translations, not just translations, but actual versions, right? Where the Qur'an is just one. And this is something we really need to appreciate. You know, for those of you who are a little bit more advanced, there's so many different theological differences even, and so many different sects and groups, but all of them are from the Qur'an, from Surah Al-Fatiha all the way to Surah Al-Nas. This is what unites all of us, right? There may be theological differences even, and big differences and minor differences, but despite all of these differences, because Allah has taken the responsibility, I have revealed it and I'm going to preserve it, therefore everyone accepts the Qur'an from Surah Al-Fatiha all the way to Surah Al-Nas. And majority of the people, I mean, it's not good to say everyone, of course there's all types of people everywhere, but pretty much all of the Muslim sects, majority of them, whether it's the Mu'tazila, whether it's this group, that group, from within Ahl Sunnah, different, everyone accepts the Qur'an to be the miracle of the Prophet ﷺ and the greatest miracle. Therefore, we need to cherish this miracle. Therefore, we need to read and then understand and finally implement the Qur'an. So, with this said, I encourage all of you to build that connection with the Qur'an, with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every day try to read a small portion. If you can read 1 juz, half a juz, just read 1 page, half a page, and try to understand as well. Both are important. Tilawah is important because this is the speech of Allah. For every letter you recite, you get a reward. So that is important, but don't just only focus on reading. Understanding is also important and is equally important, if not more important. But don't also trivialize the reading part as well, because realize this is how the Qur'an has been preserved, that we read the Qur'an and this is how it has been preserved, and this is what keeps this ummah unique, more unique than all of the other ummahs. And with this I conclude, wa akhiru da'wan and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله